And I need to share my screen as well.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, I still have to allow that. There we go.
Okay, very good.
And I think something's happening here as well. Okay, I think we are live. People are coming in. We are live on YouTube as well. That is great. I hope everyone can hear and see us. Welcome, everybody. Wait, now, Esther, you're gone from me? Are you gone for real? Oh, no, there you are. Okay. Okay, welcome, everyone, to tonight's talk. My name is Daniel Messmer. I am the Cultural Program Manager at the German-American Institute in Tübingen. I am very glad that you join us tonight for this exciting talk that we are about to hear by Esther Earbin. Before we move over to the talk part of the night, I will just say a couple of words about the Institute, and then I will hand over to Philip, who is here for the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung, who is our cooperational partner for the event tonight. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you.
So the German-American Institute, for those of us who do not know us, usually I ask for a show of hands who knows us and who has been to a meeting or an event of ours before, but we can't do that here, so I'll just keep talking. The German-American Institute is a bicultural institution based in Tübingen that brings a little bit of America to Tübingen and tries to perpetuate the German-American friendship. And we do that through talks, through movie screenings, through language courses, through exhibitions, art exhibitions. We have a lot of stuff going on. And tonight is actually our final event for this term. We're going to be on break starting in August for a month, and then we'll be back in September with a whole new program. So while I would usually do some advertising for talks and events that would come up soon, there is not a lot I can tell you tonight. All I can tell you is keep your eyes peeled. Maybe check out our website, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, where you will be informed about all the things we have planned in the future. But enough of that, enough advertising. I'm very glad that we're not here alone tonight. The Konrad Adenauer, the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung is once again helping us out with this talk, which is great. They're always a nice cooperation partner, and I'm very glad that they're here tonight. And I will hand things over to Philip. Philip, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Daniel, but also the German-American Institute for the possibility of cooperation for today's event, but also in the past and hopefully in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Philipp Rosé, and I'm one of the program managers of the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung, beziehungsweise Friedrich-Naumann Foundation of Freedom of the Neckar-Alb region. For all those of you who are attending on an FNF event for the first time, a few introductory words. The Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom pursues the purpose of political education and political principles worldwide in the spirit of liberalism. I would also like to mention the local Reinhold-Maier Foundation as a further cooperation partner of this event, which is a party-related foundation that works closely with the regional office of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom in Stuttgart. I would like to take the opportunity to recommend future events to you. After my introduction, I will put 4 events links in the chat, and we would like to see or meet you in the future events as well. But now to our most current and exciting topic and to our protagonist of today's event. The Corona pandemic changes our daily life in different ways and makes us become inventive. Take today's event as a simple example, a web talk. We will use the digital opportunity to stay with you in touch and continue our program. Technical innovation has found harmony in our everyday lives, regardless of the Corona pandemic. But have you ever wondered whether all these opportunities might not also in turn entail certain risk? I would like to give you a few examples you can think about. What is the legal liability of accidents involving self-propelled cars? And can ethically acceptable risk assessments be made by using big data to determine whether someone will be remanded in custody or released on bail? Predictive analytics. And is predictive policing a monitoring body or a preventive instrument for protecting the society? All these questions open up with every new technical achievement. As a law student, I'm very much looking forward for today's lecture and would like to introduce now our expert who will give us a deeper insight in the aspects of justice, freedom, and security in the digital age. Esther Tabitha Earbin is a lawyer, designer, and lecturer from Indianapolis, Indiana. She has lectured internationally on issues of law, media, and American culture. She currently lives in Freiburg, where she is finishing her doctoral studies with the Max Planck Institute for Crime, Security, and Law. She is also a US certified information privacy professional, which underlines her expertise for this web talk. Now, I hope that you are not affected by the Zoom fatigue. Wish us a very interesting and informative presentation. And Esther, the digital stage is all yours. Thank you.
Oh, and maybe just to jump in once more, if you have questions throughout the talk, we will have time at the end to answer all your questions, but you can ask questions through the question and answer feature that Zoom offers. If you just go to the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A or an F&A little symbol, and you can click on that and you can ask questions that Esther will then be able to answer towards the end of the talk. You can also type them up in the chat, or if you are watching on YouTube, you can type them in the YouTube chat, and we will be able to answer those at the end of the talk. All right, Esther, stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, Philip and Daniel, and thank you all for coming tonight. I am going to give you just a brief talk, and just to let you know, I apologize for any internet technical difficulties as far as speed, but this is the world that we're living in right now. So another disadvantage of Zoom is I can't quite be present to guide you through the materials, but I will provide the materials on the screen, and you can read the information for yourself. And if you're interested in some of the links and the articles, just let Daniel know, and I'll provide that information for him as well. So basically what we're talking about tonight, as Philip mentioned, I am a certified information privacy professional, lots of letters. I know it's something new. But what it is, and it may not be new for some of you, but what it is basically looking at and understanding the international laws as it relates to privacy and data. So one of the things that I learned in my law school career or my legal career, is that what we do on the internet now is not hidden. It's not something that is private, and I'll talk a lot about privacy tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So we're talking about Law 4.0, technology, freedom, and the rewiring of society. And I don't know how much Daniel was predicting the events that we are in today, but believe it or not, a lot of this discussion we were having about this talk occurred in January, and we couldn't even predict that the topic would be even more relevant for us today. So instead of just talking about the way that we might see the law moving or see the internet moving in our involvement, we're actually participating in it right now. And I think this is very interesting for us, but also very interesting to consider how changes might still happen once we do start to open society back up and log offline. So I opened my talk with Alexa, what's happening? Alexa, if you're not familiar with this name, is a device, a smart device that many people can buy for their homes. Alexa is a smart device that can play music for you, give you information, much like the personal assistant that you have on your phone. Oh my goodness, Alexa, delete what I just said. One of the issues with Alexa is that Alexa hears all. And so when you do open yourself up to having a smart device in your home, you can hear it. It can also hear you. But the question, the concern is how often can it hear you, and who else is listening to what you're telling them? And so this is kind of an introduction to some of the privacy concerns that a lot of politicians, policymakers, advocates, especially internet advocates, and digital rights advocates are having. And we'll talk about this later. So now more than ever, especially today, our lives depend on technology. We're on a meeting right now, or a lecture that was scheduled in person, and due to a pandemic that none of us could predict, we are now online in ways that we were never online before. Our families are online, the children in our community or our own children are online. And so technology is no longer just something used for entertainment or even a privilege. At this point, it is a privilege, but it's also a necessity in these times, because now we depend on it for so much. So in 2018, Germany and much of the European Union started looking at Law 4.0 and really looking at competition law 4.0. Our interactions on the internet are not just for our everyday society or our everyday situations. We are very much a part of the digital economy, and competition law 4.0 is about this. And so is this concept of law 4.0. It's all about the digital economy. And the digital economy is also known as the internet economy. It's basically what we're doing now. It's being involved in entertainment, your banking, your selling, and a lot of different interactions that you have on the internet, whether it be on your phone or whether it be on your laptop or your mobile device. And I'd like to say also, it's a lot of banners. It's a lot of banners. Everything that we do online, we interact from health insurance to learning, to banking, to even participating in this lecture with the Institute, and even social media. We engage in all of these services, and this is a part of the digital economy. Now, even if you're not buying something, recognize that the digital economy also includes your data. And we'll talk a lot about privacy and data a little bit later. But the involvement in the digital economy is not always active. It's also very passive. Just your mere presence online, just your presence on Zoom is participation in the digital economy. And so Law 4.0 is something that addresses it. It addresses specifically what are the legal issues with the processes, people, the businesses or corporations, the communities, data and devices, artificial intelligence. What are some of the legal challenges that come up with this new digital economy? I mean, of course, the internet has existed for a very long time, but 30 years ago, you didn't have this massive use, and even 10 years ago, you didn't have the use we have today. Even 10 months ago, you didn't have the use we have today. And it also includes cat memes. In the preview, I said that our internet use includes cat memes. I'm serious. It also includes cat memes. And that is a very important part of how we interact with the internet. I thought that this particular cat meme was relevant for our time, but it also shows that there are some things that we do online that we don't even think about needing protection or legal certainty about. And Law 4.0, or even looking at our digital rights, address everything as simple as what's behind the cat meme. What rights do I have to post a cat meme? So what are some of these legal challenges in the digital economy? Well, as a digital citizen or a netizen, internet plus citizen, you have and you should be entitled to certain digital rights. Now, of course, this will vary from country to country, even from continent to continent. There is going to be a difference in what your rights will be as a digital citizen, even who you are as a digital citizen. But all in all, you have digital rights. So what does that mean? It means human rights. Digital rights are human rights on the internet. These are things that each individual, each human being should be allowed to do and should receive some protection to do. And basically, as it relates to the internet, human rights cover access. How do we, or can we even access the internet? Use of the internet, use of websites, use of services. Are we blocked? Can we even use our data or use our credit cards online? Are they protected? To create, can we create cat memes? Is that legal? Does that violate a copyright law? Does that violate some other right of someone else? And also publish, open access. Do we have the right to share information that we produce or to put information that we don't reproduce or that we don't produce online? So digital rights really cover a lot of these core areas. And it's very heavily connected to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. And tonight, we're not going to talk about all of the rights. Not all of the digital rights can fit within our time frame. But we're going to talk about two very important digital rights, the freedom of expression and the right to privacy. Now, I'm going to speak more about these things from the US context because this is where I'm licensed and this is more so where I study. But since we are in Europe, at least most of us, I can assume, I will talk a little bit about European regulations and a little of the differences between the two. So first, we're going to talk about freedom of expression. And so under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 12, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. You don't like cat memes? You're right. I'm sorry I showed it to you. You want to express that you like cat memes? Go right ahead. You have that right. This right includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. Now, this is from 1948. This is before the internet was even dreamed of. But as you can see from the language, a lot of it is very relevant to digital rights and things that we should be able to do online and do very freely. So we'll talk about what this means. And as far as the US is concerned, we have the freedom of speech according to our Constitution. So specifically, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech and or of the press is also in that clause. So the abridging of speech or the press is something that is very relevant to what happens on the internet, especially since most of us no longer buy newspapers. We get our news from Facebook, we get our news from Twitter, and then also more traditional sites like the BBC or Deutsche Welle or any of the newspapers now have an online platform. And so part of that freedom of speech in the US is being able to express yourself, give your opinion, and then also engage with the press. And the press has some of those freedoms as well. But those freedoms are limited. For example, hate speech is not allowed in the US. And what is considered hate speech? That's something that courts US courts, the Supreme Court specifically, often talk about the rights of young people to talk about, this protection doesn't cover young people who want to talk about drugs at a public event or who want to talk about illegal behaviors. These types of things are not necessarily protected by free speech. And then also posting misleading things is not necessarily a free rein. And this is what we're finding out a lot now with social media in the US, given our political culture and the fact that this is an election year. So the freedom of expression online, it really does include, do I have the right to post misinformation? Does the press have the right to promote fake news? And so these terms and these concerns are something that is really relevant to the digital economy, because what it does, it not only weakens trust in those websites or those social media platforms, it can also reduce the trust in what we are seeing and how we're interacting with websites and with the internet. And so these things are misinformation and misleading things are not allowed. So essentially, no, you do not have free speech online. I'm sorry I went through all of that about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Constitution. None of this applies to online. Of course, that's not true. I mean, governments and politicians, this is what Law 4.0 or Competition Law 4.0 is wrestling with in some ways. And this is also what the United Nations has been wrestling with as well. Investigating human rights, digital rights. Do we need a digital bill of rights that can absolutely give us free speech? But as it pertains to how we function on the internet, we technically don't have free speech. And I'm going to tell you why. Mainly because whenever you see a Trump tweet, it is on Twitter. Twitter is a private company. It's a private corporation. And the law says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, abridging speech. So if the government mandated that Twitter take something down, if the government was behind this censorship, and that's where that word comes in, censorship, then that would be a different question. But corporations don't have any rights to allow us to speak on their platform. Now they do, and they do try to balance, because part of internet culture is the right or the ability to express yourself and to be a part of a community and have different points of view heard. But when it comes to things like violence and abuse and discrimination, on the one hand, you want these companies to be responsible and take care of these things. On the other hand, it becomes difficult because they are now the judge of what people can say. A corporation is now the monitor, and not only just the corporation, but whoever the guy or girl or individual behind the screen looking at the tweet is now saying, this falls in law. So this is very, very difficult as it relates to digital rights. We have freedom of speech in theory, but when we are using private websites, that freedom is removed. And a scholar had this quote. He called websites are like walled gardens, essentially. I mean, look at this garden. Whoever owns this wall can just as quickly cut all those flowers away because it's not our wall, it's not our garden, it's theirs. Just look at Facebook. Facebook is not only the owner of the social media site that you traditionally see with the thumbs up, thumbs down. They also own Instagram. They also own WhatsApp. And so all of your communications and all of your data from these corporations are in the hands of one legal entity, one legal person. And that legal person can do what they want with your data. Now, why is that? Because you give them permission, and we'll talk about that a little later. So another related issue is blocking and filtering of internet content. And so when you don't live in a country or a part of the world that has a freedom of speech or has a protected right to speech, and the government does have more control, then you have what is called blocking. Even here in Europe, there was a big conversation about geo-blocking. So in this context, we're talking about blocking and filtering of internet content. Article 13 of the new copyright directive is discussing upload filters. So a social media site, as you upload your cat meme, could block it and say, this cat is not your cat. This cat belongs to Disney. We can't upload it. We're going to take it down. Or if it violates some other type of communication. If we're talking about political views, art, especially art, if you upload anything with nudity or bodies, those things could be filtered. Again, you have the corporations making the decisions in these cases. And a lot of concern is that they're making the decisions and being over-inclusive, or they could be over-inclusive, or the threat is that they will be over-inclusive. So blocking and filtering is not just sifting out discriminatory content. It could sift out actual legitimate content that helps us get access to information, access to dialogue, access to culture, because it could be, you could have the statue of Michelangelo's David filtered because it's nude. You could have a political commentary on Mickey Mouse or Disney filtered because of copyright violations. But there are some protections in the law, such as fair use, that allow us to use those images for our own purpose. So now we're going to talk about the right to privacy. And the right to privacy encompasses a lot of things, not only just who you are, your identity and your data, but also we'll talk a lot about security and how privacy relates to security. So Article 12 of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights is that it says that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to protection of the law against such interference or attacks. And again, as you can see, the language of the UN Declaration, or the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, it was created in 1948, but you could definitely see how this article should be relevant for our current protections online. But how do we manage that? How do we balance this arbitrary interference with privacy, or preventing the arbitrary interference with privacy with other types of societal goals or government goals, such as security or even business? And so One of the things I want you to pay attention to in this little clip, it's not quite a video that you think you're looking at, but this really does have a lot to do with how privacy can be implicated with technology online, okay? Privacy is about control. Privacy is a human right and is respected differently around the world. Privacy is often negotiated. Privacy becomes harder to protect as technology advances. And privacy can be protected by public awareness and public response, okay? So my example is a little bit later, but let's go ahead and talk about these 5 points, okay? So privacy is about control. From a well-known US Supreme Court case, the definition of privacy is provided as an individual's control of information concerning his or her person. So an individual's control of information. So what you have about yourself, what you see as your identity, what you see as your property, these things are things that the law should protect and place under your control. So privacy in this context and in many contexts in the study of privacy law includes information privacy. So that is data, things about yourself, facts about yourself, bodily privacy, being able to have some autonomy with how your body is viewed and handled and even protected, privacy of communications, and territorial privacy. So territorial privacy is your home. Can Alexa listen to all of the conversations happening in your home? Or can the government listen to the conversations happening in your home through Alexa? These are concerns that have come up as it relates to privacy online. And then you have many other areas of privacy. Privacy is a broad field. So if you are interested in it and you have some time on your hands, I definitely recommend looking more into different areas of privacy. As I mentioned, bodily privacy, but you also have genetic privacy. What happens to your DNA when you take a genetics test to find out your ancestry or your heritage? These are also things that happen very often. Medical privacy. Many of us have these devices, Fitbits. Even on our phones, if you have an iPhone, there is something that can monitor your steps. If you use a certain app that tracks your running or your health or your fitness, these types of things can be associated with medical privacy, not just your doctor's records and different things like that. Workplace privacy. So workplace privacy is something that is even more important in this day and age of Corona because our homes are now our workplaces. So what does that mean for the law? What protections are we allowed when we're now working from home? What can our bosses see? What can our companies monitor or regulate? Privacy as a human right is respected differently around the world, and I mentioned that. And that's because privacy is human right, but it's not absolute. We have to negotiate privacy sometimes. Sometimes where we think we have privacy, we have none at all, and that's for other reasons. So as it relates to the way the law works, with the exception of the US, privacy is written expressly in the constitutions of most countries. And so this is what this means. Outside of the constitution of many countries, you have a regulatory model of privacy. So the Constitution might have a right to autonomy, a right to integrity. These things can also mean privacy. But these things are often codified in laws and regulations. In the US, we have a sectoral model. So we have a right to privacy, but it can be for different areas and in different ways. For example, we have special laws with the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, financial privacy, bank records. These things don't all fall into the same privacy laws or statutes. They have to be interpreted by the courts. And then they also have to be regulated by the different agencies in the executive branch. So this also makes US privacy very difficult. So why is this important? The GDPR opens up to us a lot of reasons why this is important. The fact that the US has a sectoral model is important because our understandings of privacy are very different. Our protections of privacy are very different. Yet, everything that you use, or not everything, but most apps, most major corporations are American corporations. They are come from American soil. Facebook, Twitter, Google, Zoom. A lot of these corporations have US locations. And so the way that privacy is treated in these countries very much relate to how the corporation is going to conduct business. And so the GDPR is the core privacy regulation for Europe, but it pertains to websites all over the world. If you have a website that or if you plan on doing any business in Europe, you have to follow this policy. And one of the good things that this policy did, it really started to provide some guidelines for corporations in privacy matters. And so now you have Facebook, you have Google, you even have news broadcasts. For example, if you follow any of the local news channels or any local websites from the US, they have to follow the GDPR. If they cannot, then you'll see a nice little message and say, our European consumers are important to us. However, we are not broadcasting or we're not offering this service in the EU. And that's because they may not have the capacity to follow this guideline. So these guidelines of the GDPR are very important to how we interact with the digital economy in Europe. And it's affected how others outside of Europe also interact with the digital economy. So the GDPR requires corporations to ensure that the rights of data owners, you as a data owner, but also corporations and other organizations, are respected and personal data is gathered legally and under strict conditions and protected. So this is basically a standard to make sure that your data and how it is used is protected. And we're not just talking about entering your email and your passwords and your home address and different things like that. We're also talking about metadata, the data about data, all of those things collected and how they are shared and bought and sold. And so this is an effect. When I try to look up some more cat memes, I keep getting these I accept. But one of the problems with these particular notices about privacy, you can accept, but how many of us really know what we are accepting? So privacy notices are very long and complex. There was even a study from 2008 that suggested that if every individual sat and read every privacy notice of every website that they visited within a certain period of time, they would be reading for 30 full working days. So what do? We give up some of our privacy, and we don't really know how much because we don't read the privacy policies. And in case you were curious, I did not accept. So I just let those cat memes go for right now. I thought I had accepted enough privacy policies. So number 3 is that privacy is also negotiated. It is something that we give a little bit to get something in return. And on the web, this is where that happens. If we want free email, if we want free videos on YouTube, we give away some of our data, our watching habits, our information when we log in. A lot of those things, that stuff is compensated in other ways, instead of us paying actual currency or actual money for it. The currency of this platform, and of course the currency of many platforms, is data. So as it relates to Europe, a lot of the things we negotiate for privacy is free speech. We want to be able to have ourselves heard. We want to post things on Twitter. We want to share things on Facebook. The other thing that we often negotiate is security. When there is a person that is attacking a society, if there is a child predator doing something harmful online, we tend to give up some of our security because law enforcement needs to be able to find who or what is harming or the potential threat to society. And a lot of times we don't really know how that works. We also can get second chances. The right to be forgotten is a very important policy that happens here in Europe when you want to delete all of your information off of the internet. You have the right, for a second chance to scrub all that off of the internet, but you might also lose some of your access to websites, or you lose some of your participation in the digital economy. And that's why a lot of people don't do that. Human dignity, and this can also relate to security. We can often negotiate, how we want to be presented to society, and sharing our meals, our locations, things that we might not want other people to know. For example, strangers, we might give that up online. And then also, there are some negotiations, so there is consistency with current and potential members of the EU as it relates to security. Law enforcement in your country not only has to work alone, but they have to connect to the law enforcement agencies of other countries, both in the US, both in the EU, both in other parts of the world. And so this is often a negotiation of your privacy. And then also holding other countries accountable in trade. Sometimes privacy is exposed in that way, especially shopping habits, buying habits, metadata. And in the US, we often have a negotiation for free speech and anonymity. We want to negotiate what we expose because we want to be able to express ourselves. But then also we might negotiate it because we don't even want to, we want to express ourselves, but we don't want to be connected. Security is a huge issue. And I'll give you another example of that. And then also open government and transparency. So we in the United States, basically, because of our legal history and our political history, we don't really trust government so much. We do in a sense, but we like to know what our government is doing. We want to make sure that they are doing the jobs that we voted for them to do. And so in this regard, we have a lot of laws for transparency as it relates to having access to court records, public access to court records, having access to lobbying information, donations, political campaigns. And while you're thinking, okay, well, that's not necessarily my privacy, but if you wanted to support a presidential candidate and you voted, or not voted for them, but you donated to their campaign, let's say you own a business or you are a part of what we call a political action committee, or you are a part of the political party, then those things can be public information. And so we want to know those things as a society, but if you're one of the people that participate in that activity, then you might just not want that information shared. Okay, and mugshots is how this happens. We all like to hear about what our favorite celebrities are doing, especially if they're getting arrested. But one of the aspects of a loss of privacy, especially with open government and as well as the open access to information, is if you are arrested in the US and your picture is taken, it becomes part of a database of mugshots that can be accessed online in some regards, depending on the laws of the state. So this is something that is very important to remember. And then also the negotiation of privacy can sometimes be a conflict between rights and protections. So for example, you have government surveillance versus security. And this is a very well-known case, the Edward Snowden case, where it turns out that the National Security Agency of the US was not only looking into its own citizens, but also citizens of other countries, including Germany, including the Chancellor, Angela Merkel. There was a big controversy surrounding this. And this is where most of the public became aware that what we do online, what we do with our technology is not always so secret or not always so protected. And a lot of times this is in the interest of security. And this happened during Obama's administration. And so there was a big protest about this, and there was a campaign about the NSA and what the US government was doing as far as surveillance of other countries. And then on the US soil, you have law enforcement versus technology. And this is something that's relevant to some of the things that have happened over the last week. So the police departments in the US in many different states and cities use facial recognition software. So what this is it might run through mugshot databases, but they could also use it in airports. They can also use it online for Facebook posts to match with fake IDs or with anonymous posts. And so the New York Times wrote an article about this and what it actually means. And then also with the recent protests on police brutality, a number of corporations that offer facial recognition technology to police departments said that they're no longer going to use it until it's regulated. And so this software is already being used. It's not only in the US as well. Actually, the previous article was talking about a facial recognition software that was created in France. And a lot of these technologies are used online to do a lot of investigations. Philip also mentioned predictive policing. These types of technologies affect how we interact online and within the digital economy. And so what I want you to understand is that there is a backdoor to your privacy. So your devices are secure, encrypted, your websites are secure and encrypted, but those companies and those corporations have some obligation to law enforcement. And this is another challenge. What obligation do they have to law enforcement to access information? And so this happened in the 2015 incident with a mass shooter in the US. Apple said, FBI, no, we're not going to give you a backdoor. Once we open up and give you access to encrypted data, anyone can get access to that. And this is something that the corporations have been repeating for years. All of them are resisting law enforcement or resisting politicians' push to create a special backdoor access to private information or data, or to break the codes of security features. And so, number 4, privacy becomes harder to protect as technology advances. And here is my example. Pay attention to the faces. This is how technology has changed, and your privacy or your image can be used.
Here's the very funny Bill Hader, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it seemed like every movie I saw in the last several months, you were in it, and good for you. That's
thanks, buddy. Thanks.
And I was wondering about the one, the Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, Tropic Thunder.
Where Tom Cruise. You're working with Tom Cruise. What was that experience like?
It was amazing. Like we got to dance together. That was amazing. We had like you know, when you do a movie, you do table reads. You know, where like all the actors get together,
at the beginning of
at the beginning, before anything, you get together and you read through the script. And so it's like, you know, all these heavyweights, like you know, Ben Stiller, Jack Black, Robert Downey Jr., everybody. And at the end is like me, like you know, like hey. Happy to be here, guys. You know, like, and some other supporting guys, and then Tom Cruise walks in, and even those guys are like, "Whoa!" And he's super stoked to be there. You know, just like, "Yeah, oh, boom!" You know, like he's like, wow. He's just immediately excited when he walks into a room. And so he comes over and he sits next to me, and I think he had been briefed on some of the supporting guys, but he was like trying to place me, you know? So he sat down next to me, and he's like, I love your work. And I went, oh, thanks. I love your work too, Tom Cruise. You know, like, thanks. And I go, yeah, you know, I'm friends with Judd Apatow and Seth Rogen, and they went to your house. And went, yes. They did come to my house, and I said, Seth Rogen was like, you know, it was amazing. He has like a bike track in his backyard. It's phenomenal. and I did a Seth Rogen impression, and it was like I did a magic trick. Tom Cruise was like, yeah. Wow. And he points to me. Pointed to me and he goes, you do impressions and you're on Saturday Night Live. It was like you won a game show. He was like, yeah, Tom.
And that kind of enthusiasm from that kind of a star, obviously a little intimidating, a little overwhelming.
It is a little overwhelming. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
You were able to work out and everything was fine?
Yeah, everything was great.
And when it was over, it was all good?
Yeah, it was great. At the premiere, he came up to me and he goes, can you believe we were in that movie? And I was like, I can't believe you were in that movie. Like, you're Tom Cruise. Like, yeah.
Here's the very...
So, as you can see, if you can tell, the faces of the speaker were changing to impersonate the person who he was impersonating. Essentially, the faces of another person were put into a body of someone else. So how does this affect your privacy? Well, your picture is online. If your videos are online, the way technology is now, someone can take that image and place it in another place with or without your permission. And so these particular technologies really do concern individuals as to, all right, how can I protect myself from this type of technology? A lot of these technology, and this is called a deep fake. It's one of those, it's a video that can be used for political purposes or entertainment purposes to put other people's images in video that they were not originally in. So this could be amazing for movies as far as actors and actresses being able to participate in movies that they never acted in, or it didn't have to leave their homes, especially in these days of the pandemic, to be able to manipulate images. But where it's been a concern, you have individuals whose images and video was used for free pornography, or videos that did not show them in a positive light that would hurt their reputation. And so this is also important. And that leads me into our negotiation of privacy for entertainment. We often, again, agree to these websites because we want free information, or we want cheap information, or we want to connect with families, or we want to take really great pictures of our vacation and share them with people for free, or see really wonderful free pictures for free, or even just laugh or get involved with political commentary. All of these things can be done for our entertainment. And another way is with our smart devices. This is Hello Barbie. She is considered a smart toy. She uses artificial intelligence to respond and talk back to children or whoever owns the doll based upon pre-programmed phrases. And so a concern about this doll was when it was released in 2015, between that and 2017, is that hackers could hack into Barbie and tell Barbie and program new phrases into that. And so that makes your children vulnerable. But this is how smart devices work if they're not secure. Now, many corporations do push to make sure these devices are secure and address these concerns. But these are things that continuously need to be a part of our thought process and our considerations as it relates to what we use on the internet, how we use the internet, whether it be directly through our laptops or through our smart devices, or whether it just be through our phones. So everything that we do and connected to the internet, we have to decide, how should we be protected? How should those things be protected? And so 5, and this is where we all come in, the related point is privacy can be protected by public awareness and response. So now you know about all of these issues about privacy. What can you do? I'm not going to make you read all of those privacy notices. I'm recommending that it's a good idea to start reading your privacy notices. But now you know that there are a lot of concerns about things that are done on the internet. How are things, how is your data protected? You can expect of these services what you expect of any person that holds your information. Lawyers hold your information. Your doctors hold your medical records, and you hold them accountable. So when there is a breach or when there is a concern, you address it, or you're forthcoming about addressing it. So media is powerful, the internet is powerful, but your participation in the digital economy is just as powerful. And so corporations really want you to trust them. They do not want to lose your business. They do not want people logging off. It is in their interest. And so this gives you a tool, a powerful tool to be able to make sure that those corporations are held accountable. And as far as protecting your privacy, especially if they have to negotiate with the government what is necessary, but then also look exactly at how you're looking at privacy. You have some people that say, well, you know, if you're not doing anything wrong, then what is there to hide? Well, that may be true, but how often do you want your home exposed? How often do you want your personal information exposed? It's not necessarily about doing anything wrong. It's about having control over your data, who you are, your life, your expression. And this is what we want companies to do. This is what we want the internet to provide for us, so we can be very productive citizens in the digital economy. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that I did not have too many technical difficulties, and I'm really excited about any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. This was very informative. Now, if you have questions that you would like to ask Esther, feel free to either type them up in chat or use the question and answer feature that Zoom offers. Yeah, maybe getting things started. I think I do have a couple of questions. First and foremost, I mean, we talked a lot about how the regulations and the laws often are similar to one another, especially, for example, in Europe. But how do you enforce law when there are no borders? Because the internet as a whole doesn't really respect any borders, right? It's just a thing that is there. So how can I, as a German citizen, for example, get my rights enforced if someone from another country that has a whole different understanding of the law is breaking what I feel is my privacy?
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, good. My internet slowed down. So good question. Excellent question. This is a big issue of enforcement. So in the EU, for the GDPR, for companies and corporations that do not follow these guidelines, they face a huge fine, right? And you know, that is at least some protection, right? You have regulations that if someone does not follow the law, then they can be excluded or they can pay a heavy fee. Internet governance is another part of the conversation that we didn't have a lot of time to get into. And this is where countries and representatives from countries and corporations come together to decide on how do you enforce these laws? How do you enforce these regulations? One way that a lot of the countries do this is through trade. So for example, yeah, as it relates to not necessarily privacy, but I can speak at least a little bit to copyright. If a country is not holding its citizens accountable for what they stream or the piracy that are for stealing content or taking content and publishing on the web, then that country can face trade sanctions. That's one way that governments can enforce the rules and regulations, is imposing trade sanctions on countries that have a massive number of individuals that are not respecting. Another issue that is quite concerning to a lot of privacy advocates is that accountability becomes more and more difficult as corporations become larger and larger. The example is Facebook. Facebook has bought up a lot of its competition, and the rules and regulations for monopolies and antitrust are not necessarily tailored for internet corporations. So hopefully in the coming years, governments will be able to use these particular laws as another way of holding people accountable. Because if we find that a corporation is not dealing in trustworthy business practices, then we have the rights as customers to take away their business, exclude them from the digital economy, make them take away their benefits in the market. And so this becomes much, much more difficult when you have gigantic corporations that own the processes we do online. Taking our business away from Google, at least I know my business away from Google, is not going to hurt them so bad. So
Yeah, but maybe to follow up on that, I mean, even now when a lot of really big companies like Apple or I think Nike or someone else, they they said that they would stop advertising on Facebook if they wouldn't comply with, certain standards, um, which I would assume would have a lot more weight than my individual decisions would do. But it doesn't seem to really change anything as of yet.
Well, I mean, again, Facebook has a lot less to lose than some of these other corporations because, I mean, it just depends on what their advertising revenue is and how much power they have politically as well as financially. And that's what makes it very difficult. I mean, Facebook is essentially a behemoth. We're not just talking about a social media platform. We're talking about a corporation that buys and sells data. We're talking about a corporation that is invested heavily in politics as well. And so as it relates on really hurting their decisions, if they're so big, it's hard to control them. Compared to a smaller platform like Twitter, it's not so gigantic, but Twitter caved into a lot of pressure about muting tweets from Donald Trump or muting hate speech and regulating those things. They have a little bit more to lose. And so these issues are connected. The size of who we're regulating are attempting to regulate, as well as what their interests are and how can we tap into those interests to truly regulate them.
Okay, thank you. A question I think ties in very well with that is a question that just came in through chat. Should digital law be managed globally, for example, by the United Nations?
You know, it's a great concept, but you got to get the U.S. on board, and we're not so married to the idea of having the United Nations govern our processes. I do think that, I mean, there is internet governance and there is a process of negotiation, as I mentioned, as it relates to these things. I think the difficulty, speaking as a lawyer for one country, working in another, is that law is very different from country to country, and different things, different processes mean very different things to the culture, as well as the governments and the interests as well. For example, digitally. Again, my area of research is copyright and piracy online. And so one of the biggest issues with digital piracy or digital copyright is, especially between a country like China and many Western countries, is this perception of information and sharing is much different culturally. And so when you take one legal system or one form of code and law and impose it into another, we call this when you transpose law, or when you try to transition law into another culture, it can become very difficult. And then it just depends on whose law reigns. Do we think US law is strongest? So we use US's law as the model. We think EU's laws is strongest and we use EU laws. And then also, since we're talking about the digital economy, the priorities of the marketplace play a lot into it. And so if you have a country, especially more capitalist countries, that are really supportive of free markets, then they're going to want to have less regulation, and that's going to apply to the digital environment as well. But it's a great start. I mean, I think once you do have these guidelines set, for example, the GDPR, and then also, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and you have enough people joining in, you have an opportunity for some changes in many countries to join in, and then you leave the odd man out. But as we see in the case of the US, depending on who that odd man is or an odd individual is, it may not be as effective effective for protecting everyone. And this was the case with the NSA. So thank you, great question.
All right, thank you for the answer. I don't know, Philip, do you have a question?
I have a question, and it's, I think, point number 5. And you said something about to secure data or the privacy, it's a self-responsibility. Is that right? Okay. So, and you make a point, if I think about my parents and a little bit about my life, because I can separate the time. I have not all the opportunities, and now I have the opportunities. So I may think about, okay, what is for me right, how much I want to go or not. But what would you say about the generation, they grow up with these opportunities? They may not even know what is like privacy for them. I mean, privacy for them is to grow up with, I said, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and all the opportunities. So maybe the question is, what would you do, like, to educate or to bring a little bit more, I don't want to say sustainable, but more like a secure behavior with data? What would you say to the digital generation?
Yeah, so this is actually something that has been promoted heavily online. It's the concept of digital citizenship, educational curriculums for youth and young people to know, like, what are some of the most acceptable and common behaviors that should be online. For example, no bullying or respecting other people's rights, not sharing certain things. And so I know that there is a real push to standardize these things for very, very young people who are born into this life compared to us and our parents. The other thing I think that the current situation, the pandemic has opened up, is that now that we are home or interacting with our families differently, we have to have these conversations about technology because it's all that we have in some cases. And so, I mean, first you do have to make sure you know kind of what are some of the rules or responsibilities, and really take it upon yourself to understand what it is like to be a digital citizen or to be a member of the internet, and what am I missing as it relates to my rights that I should be enforcing. And then once you learn those things and you're invested in those things, then you can share those with your family members. Because I think once we understand a topic or a subject matter or something that we become very passionate about and that we can use, then it's much easier for us to communicate it with our family, as in with all areas of human rights. Digital rights can be applied, as I mentioned at the beginning, to other human rights. So your family members, from your parents down to your younger siblings or your children, if you understand what's at stake and what's involved, and how you can change things or hold people accountable, then you can better communicate it to them, or find somebody that you trust that can do that as well.
Thank you.
Good question.
I think there's another question in the chat.
All right. What are laws yet missing in the EU? As I mentioned, there's a lot of areas of competition law 4.0, as Germany was exploring the new copyright directives and regulations, and then also with the GDPR. What are some things that are still missing? From my research and from my studies, I think that there is still a lack of true transparency in how corporations and governments work together for law enforcement and for security. There are some things in place. However, as you can see with this kind of push to open back doors and have access to encrypted data, monitoring and surveillance, predictive policing, and how are these things used with social media platforms. I think the laws don't neatly address that, and they really should, especially as it relates to citizens. At least if they do, we should have a better understanding of how this happens. But as we are talking about the internet, a platform and a creator, what do you call this? A force for technology, a force of technology. There are new technologies that are coming into play that we can't predict. There are problems that we are just now coming upon, because once we start using technology even more, then we also have a better understanding of it ourselves. So I think the new technologies that are being developed, as far as deep fakes, misinformation, these types of things the EU is wrestling with, and as much of the world. One of the things I will say that will be important is just to make sure that the public is represented, civil society is represented in these negotiations and these conversations. It becomes very difficult when you're talking about a highly technical field that the corporations or the representatives of the corporations know very well. But then you have a lot of really good civil society groups that also hire lawyers and technologists, such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that make a lot of suggestions to lawmakers, both in the US and abroad, as to what are the concerns with privacy and technology rights.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question that just came in: what do you think about the European Court of Justice's decision concerning the US-EU Privacy Shield? What are the consequences of this decision?
That is a good question. I have not read up on that in a while. So I don't think I can speak so pointedly to that as far as the Privacy Shield. Yeah, let me come back to that. Let me think about that for a little bit.
Okay, maybe circling back to the question that we had earlier about, responsible behavior. I cannot help but feel like there is this disconnect between the internet being an essential part of our lives. I think no one could think that we could live without the internet these days. But at the same time, there is little to no education especially for children, how to use this device or this powerful thing responsibly. Do you think there should be, I don't know, like an ESRB rating for the internet? Because I think now these days kids sometimes get their first smartphone when they're barely old enough to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden they have access to this vast landscape of things that are, a lot of them fairly innocent, but a lot of them aren't. So should there be a minimum age to access certain parts of the internet?
I don't think so, because I think, and this is probably more or less my US brain, I think each parent has the right to determine that for themselves. And I think as it relates to the responsibility of, I think that's also very hard to manage. It's very, very hard to regulate in itself, because children are smart, and they are coming up with this technology. It is the responsibility, I think, it should be a responsibility of parents to teach their children about the internet, but that's also assuming that the parents themselves know how to use the internet responsibly. I mean, I think about this concept of the troll and misinformation and all of these things. I mean, some of these people could be parents, they're using the internet in ways that other people don't see as acceptable for other purposes. But I think that there should at least be the access to information, the access to these possibilities. For example, as I mentioned, the digital citizens, the digital citizenship curriculums are a very good idea. When I was in school, we had typing classes. I mean, I hate to date myself and how schools were set up. And I don't think that, at least, I mean, my daughter is now 20, from her education, that I can remember her taking an internet responsibility course, or a course regarding typing and internet access. I think that could be a really good idea to implement some standard of education with internet use. However, as we are in a pandemic and something that was not predicted, we were just kind of thrusted into it. So I kind of feel like it's maybe 20 or 30 years too late for that. Just given how easy the internet is to access. You do have parental controls in some regard, but I mean, it just depends on how well they are used, how smart your kids are, if they can't hack right past them. Yeah, I mean, I think there should be some standard, but as it relates to actual official regulations and ratings and different things like that, it's much like having a universal digital law. It would be hard to universally apply. I mean, even with the ESRB ratings, I mean, the differences between what kind of video game I can get in Europe and what it has, violence versus nudity, is very different in the US. And so you're going to run into the same issue with any type of rating system.
May I have another question? And it shouldn't sound like a yes or no question, but maybe you can tell me a little bit more about it. But I think like the progress of the technical development is everybody's like wishing and willing, but the ethical discussion next to them, to the development we have, is for me a little bit like more shortly. So the question for you, what do you think, like, do we or should we talk a little bit more about the ethical risk and the chances, like to have like a balance by all the development we can use and we shouldn't use?
Yes, I think ethical considerations as far as data use, data management, business ethics surrounding data I think that's extremely important. And I think even having these deep philosophical discussions about what are the right questions to ask as it relates to data and what should people be able to do, what should they not be able to do. What can or should we allow? What is right? What is just? You know, these types of questions are extremely important, and I think they should definitely be had. The challenge with that is that we are also talking about the nature of business, and the nature of business is very fast. And the nature of politics has also become very fast. But I think that there lies an opportunity. I think there could be more research into the ethics behind these things. I know there are certain centers and there are some research institutes that do start to look in the ethics of data and the Internet of Things and economics, or in the internet economy. And I think more things should be studied and researched and put out there. And so this is an opportunity. The conversations may not happen, especially in these in political arenas or business platforms and different things like that. But putting those questions out there, putting those starting the dialogue, whether it be through research publications or through websites or something like that. I think if it's not there, I think that's an opportunity to create it. And it definitely is relevant. That was more than a yes or no question for me, sorry.
It was great, thank you. There is another question. Daniel, do you want, or?
Sure, yeah. So another question that came through the chat, how much control should governments have over the internet in order to grant safety to the public? Should they be able to trace, for example, drug dealers, although that would mean less privacy for the individual, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that it definitely does test the privacy when trying to fight crime. And then we have to discuss how much freedoms do we want for security. Interesting thing about U.S. Jurisprudence, especially in the privacy area and Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, and especially with technology, a lot of these cases are about people who were actually guilty of committing the crime. But the question is, should the police or the law enforcement authorities have the ability to violate people's rights just to catch the criminal? And I guess it also depends on if we're talking about drugs versus mass bombings or shootings or different things like that. But just keep in mind, just like the conversations with the backdoor debates, just like the backdoor debates as far as encryption, once those doors are open for law enforcement to do it for drug dealers, and stop them from doing it for average citizens. There was a Fourth Amendment case, I think it was U.S. v. Jones, a few years ago. Was in law school, so this was probably around 2012, 2013. And one of the lawyers for the case went on the radio that morning and said, oh, it was about a tracking device. So the police were trying to track a drug dealer, and they put a GPS device on the bottom of his car without his knowledge. And so there was the question, does a person have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their vehicle? And the lawyer said, the lawyer for the convicted person said that, that would mean that if law enforcement wanted to, they could put a device under one of the Supreme Court justices' cars. Where does it stop? We are talking about procedures and processes that can be used, and this can either help or hurt us depending on who's in power and what their objectives are for society. So there should definitely be a balance, and I think this goes to Philip's question also about ethics as it relates to these. The trolley example. Who should be protected is just like who should be saved. And so these things are going to be very different. And one thing to also consider, if we're talking about governments having control over the internet, you as an individual should think, okay, so does that mean that I want the president that I like or the chancellor that I like to have control over it to fight crime, or the person that I don't like to have control over these particular mechanisms? Once that control or once that access is granted, whoever is in power has that access.
Okay, maybe to open a whole nother can of worms, could you talk a little bit about the dark web? Because I think that's a whole different story, right? Because on the one hand, it's kind of like the Wild West where everything goes and there is no law and everyone does what they want, and there's a lot of really bad stuff going on. But at the same time, the dark web also has allowed for communication in countries where the public channels are unavailable.
Yeah, so the dark web is a whole additional can of worms. And I think a lot of the conversation about the dark web is similar to the early conversations about the internet, as far as it being a Wild West, an unregulated kind of wasteland of data, information, people doing things that are illegal and legal. It exists. It's very difficult. Shutting that down is essentially shutting down a part of the net, whether it be accessible to everyone or not. And then you do have a lot of law enforcement work on the dark net as well. But I think it's just another one of those parts of the internet that has to be thrown into this larger conversation of governance and how to handle these things. If you're a supporter of internet culture as it originated or from its roots, then you're opposed to that, because the freedom, the Wild West allow us to be able to develop, to grow. I mean, one of the arguments for this technology is that, you know, hackers trying to get around protections made security measures much stronger. Technology that allowed piracy and copyright infringement became iTunes, Netflix, you know, and Dropbox. So it just really depends on, you know, how we want to negotiate, you know, what should be allowed and why it is allowed. Dark web and kill web. All right,
Okay,
another
thank you.
question.
Yeah, I think we could make this one the final question for tonight.
Okay, and I'm sorry I couldn't get back to the European Court of Justice. I can put something together and give that to Daniel. Just to
Yeah, I mean,
sure
if you're interested in a follow-up, let me know, and then I can pass Esther's answer around. So final question for tonight. Are blockchains a chance to create more privacy, especially in financial cases?
Yeah, they do have some potential for more privacy and security in finances. The thing about it is that blockchains, in addition to cryptocurrencies and other cryptocurrencies and different things like that, are not accessible to a lot of people. And also the technology is really very, very complicated. And so there's an opportunity there for protection, but how do you regulate it, especially when the people who need to make the regulations may not understand the technology? And so that way the people that can abuse it have the upper hand in that regard. And so I think, yeah, I think there is some opportunity for blockchain, but I think the technology is a problem for governance. I mean, our lawmakers are not the technologists. They are not the people that have the cyber security backgrounds. They defer to other people and experts who are often the people who get the most benefit out of these technologies. So, but if as long as we can figure out if it's the right thing to do, then, you know, it's all good.
All right. Esther, thank you very much for the talk and all the answers you just gave. Philip, thank you so much for being here for the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Yes, always. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for trusting technology enough to embrace the digital era that we are forced to live in at the moment. I can only encourage you to check out what the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation has to offer. I think, Philip, you shared a couple of links in the beginning. They always have great programs that are really interesting and really informative. So please do check them out. Please check out our website. Come say hello when we are able to open again, or when we're open again in September. But other than that, I hope you all take something away from tonight. I hope you all are a little bit more aware of what Law 4.0 means, what the internet has to offer. And I think exciting times lie ahead, and we have a lot to figure out as a society and as a people. But I'm curious to see where the journey takes us. All right. I think this will do for tonight. Thank you for being here. I would wish you a safe journey home, but I think most of us are sitting at home anyway. So be safe, stay healthy, and I hope I'll see you sometime in the future again. Thank you very much for being here. Good night.
Thank you.